All right, ladies and gentlemen, I think it's about time for us to officially convene. If you'll take your seats, please, and give us your attention, I will officially call the 123rd session of the, isn't that right, the commission? To order. A few preliminary matters. I detect a quorum, dispense with the calling of the roll. For all of your benefit, please be reminded that I believe this is the first commission meeting in history where we are being video streamed so that our constituents and citizens across the state can watch these proceedings. Senator Kyle is probably on his way, but it was really in part as a result of his initiative earlier in this session that we began to look at other public meetings that were, for various reasons, not video streamed and therefore not archived, and working with our staffs and the clerks, the House and the Senate, and a lot of talent that we have here, we were able to get TACIR to be included in those proceedings that are video streamed. So welcome to that world, and we have to remind ourselves occasionally, you know, that everyone is watching. So it's not what you say necessarily, but what you may do in an idle moment that will be captured for eternity. Secondly, having said that, a couple of special introductions. We have two new members in Representative Mike Carter here. I think most of you know Mike, and Ryan Haynes, also your first meeting. I have a special guest in Miss Meredith Compton, who's there in the third row. She's a sophomore at Vanderbilt University, is very interested in public policy, and actually says she's interested in annexation, which is something for a college sophomore to say, and I'm happy to have her here. We also need to stop and take note that today is Lenice Rorick Patrick's birthday. This is the anniversary of the occasion of her birth. And
Which one is that?
Well, now that's getting a little personal. I won't embarrass her now that we're live and on television with a singing of happy birthday, but if you all would join me in congratulating her on seminal event. We also have here in the front row the chairman of the House Local Government Committee, Matthew Hill, is here with us today. Thank you, Matthew, for being with us. It's not your birthday, is it? Okay. And I don't think I've overlooked anyone. If I have, give me a shout. The first order of business, the official order of business, is approval of the minutes from our last meeting. Yeah, thank you, Isla. Thank you. It's been properly moved and seconded. Any revisions, corrections, comments, questions? Seeing none, hearing none, all in favor signify by saying aye. 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 Any opposed or abstaining? All right, minutes are duly approved. Commission updates behind tab 2. You can see in the report from Lenice here several things, one of which is the election of officers. You can get a little history, a little background on who is serving, when they were appointed, by whom, and when terms extend and expire. A number of us have been reappointed, and it's at that point, we are at that point, the biannual event, I guess, biennium event, that we need to elect a new chair and vice chair. So I will take up chair first, and I will yield the chair to my able vice chair.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Floor is open for any nomination for chair. Senator Tracy. Oh, excuse me, Senator Henry.
Thank you.
Good. Motion and a second, properly seconded. Are there any other nominations? All in favor of Senator Norris being elected our eloquent chair, please say aye. Opposed, like sign, and he is duly elected for a 2-year term.
Thank you very much. I think you said our neglected Well, thank you. I appreciate it. No, it's an honor. It's an honor to serve in this capacity, and I appreciate the opportunity to do so again. I mean that, but we do have some very important work, and it's going to be a fair amount for all of us. So thank you for your confidence. And next in our order of business is the election of our vice chair. Are there nominations for the office of vice chair?
Mr. Chairman,
Mayor Beats.
it's my privilege to nominate the Honorable Tom Rowland as our vice chairman.
Second.
Properly moved and seconded. Any other nominations, or is there a nomination that the motion sees? So moved by Senator Tracy, seconded. Thank you, Mayor. Then by acclamation, if we may, all in favor of election of Mayor Rowland as our vice chair for the next 2 years, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed or abstaining? Thank you. Congratulations,
yes.
Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Congratulations.
Fleck is voting yes. Thank you all very kindly.
Thank you to everybody.
One of the things, I've said this once before, and I don't expect anyone remembers it, and I haven't done so yet. I won't do it at this moment, but I do think it's important for the chair to have some kind of committee structure, and not much of one. We only have 2 officers as it is. Issues arise, as they did in the last 2 years, concerning personnel, for example. Not often, but with the retirement of Dr. Green, for example. It's at a time like that that the chair realizes that there's no structure in place for us to deal with that kind of transition. Similarly, there may be financial issues that might arise. They never have. The budget is very simple, but then again, you don't know with the changes that are taking place at and around TVA, for example, our primary source of funding. Something could come up. So what I'm going to do, and I'll be prepared by our next meeting, is to suggest that we have some kind of a standing committee structure. It may be that the better part of valor is to just have an executive committee with several members on it. We don't really need a finance committee. We don't need a personnel committee, but the chair and the vice chair do need a little bit broader base from which to work on those issues. So notice that we'll be talking about that. And right now, my inclination is just some kind of an executive committee. Have it well balanced and there as an additional resource. Glenise, would you take up the introduction of new staff for us?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We have hired 2 new staff members since the last time we met. Nathan Shaver and Bob Morio. Would you both stand, please? Nathan is on the left, Bob is on the right. Nathan is from Memphis, got an undergraduate degree in public administration from UT, and a law degree from the Cecil C. Humphreys School of Law in Memphis. He passed the bar and is a licensed attorney. Bob Morio hails from Utica, Michigan. He's got a Master's of Architecture from the University of Detroit at Mercy. Bob worked with the MPO here in the Nashville area before he came to work for us and has a good deal of experience, though not a degree, in planning, and he's working on the planning project. Nathan is working with us on the bill that was sent, which you're going to be hearing about shortly, related to surety bonds and the possibility of substituting insurance for that for insuring against breaches of fiduciary duty on the part of public officials. Thank you. And we also have interning with us this summer Scott White and Chris Aldrich. Scott is studying economics and political science at the University of Tennessee. He comes to us once again at the recommendation of Dr. Matt Murray, who many of you know as either Dr. Doom or Dr. Gloom, one that writes the economic reports to the governor several times a year. Chris is with us for the second time. He's a law student at the new college in Belmont, at Belmont University. And Scott is going to be leaving us soon, but in the meantime, he's done some really terrific work helping us develop a new little miniature report on human capital that I think you're going to find interesting, looking at all the counties and doing some comparisons. Chris is working on the Public Chapter 441, the growth boundary and municipal annexation issues with us. He's doing a lot of the research on what other states are doing. He's going to be with us for nearly the entire summer. So thank you. And if you'll make them welcome.
Absolutely. Welcome, gentlemen. continuing the TACIR tradition of excellence there. We welcome our new full-timers and our assistants as well. Thank you very much. I think that takes us then to tab 3, and this is as you have seen, very important, very detailed. Cliff is going to walk us through sort of the legislative update and work program as amended, and give close attention, because then this obviously is very important, not only to a number of issues, but the annexation issue that is discussed later behind tab 5. And as you listen to this, be thinking about all the work that TACIR will need to undertake and complete before January 14th of next year, of 2014. We have report back required to the General Assembly, and that is going to necessitate that we have several extra meetings rather than just our quarterly meetings. And so I'm trying to give you the big picture to set the stage here. As you look at your agenda, you'll see that there's some dates suggested for meetings that once you stop and think about it, you're going to think, gosh, we don't normally meet in July and August. There's some additional work for us before the December meeting that we're accustomed to. So yes, sir, Senator Henry.
Mr. Chairman, may I suggest it'd be helpful if the chair could let us have a proposed schedule of meeting as soon as possible. Just chair pick them out so we can get them on our calendars, because they're filling up pretty fast, as you know.
Yes, Senator Henry, thank you for that. If you will look, and we can talk about this a little bit later today, but if you'll look on your agenda, you'll see on the page, it's Thursday, June 20th. If you look down under next meetings, begin to think about this. We're going to have several panel presentations related to Chapter 441. That's one of the annexation bills, but that's the bill under which the moratorium was imposed. It's sponsored in the House by Representative Carter and in the Senate by Bo Watson. And I'll tell you, there are several bills that look similar, but 441 is the key bill, Public Chapter 441, on this issue. You'll see there are Cliff will talk about this, there are a total of 7 bills, if I remember correctly, that deal with land use in one form or fashion, and some of them look very similar. And not all of them have been chaptered. Some were referred to us sort of in midstream. But the dates that you will see for a panel discussion by non-government presenters on Public Chapter 441, you see 2 dates suggested there, July 10th and 11th, or 24th and 25th. I'm getting ahead of ourselves here, Cliff, but forgive me for a moment. I'm only available, and several other people are only available on July 25th. And I asked Lanice whether for these panel discussions, and because we're focused somewhat more narrowly and specifically, rather than our typical 2-day meetings that we have quarterly, could these be 1-day meetings? And that would be my request, but in July, the only date that I could do that would be the 25th. You all can think about it. We don't need to pick right now. And then similarly, in August, we'll have to make the same kind of choice. We don't have. Do we go to October?
We do.
Oops, I got it up here. And then again, October, several choices there, and then come back in December, and we've got 2 options there. So y'all be thinking about that as we listen here, if you will. Check your calendars, and we'll try to do as Senator Henry suggests and get those mapped out very quickly. Yeah, time is fleeting. So Cliff, thank you for indulging me in that ramble, and we will turn it over to you. You're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Okay. Is this on? There we go. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Pending your questions, that concludes my presentation. No. Nonsense. Actually, as the chairman said, I will be presenting you with tab 3. I'm actually also going to present you with tab 4, the achievements for the most recent, the fiscal year ending at the end of this month, or as I like to refer to those 2 tabs collectively, the warm-up for tab 5. Tab 3 is actually broken into 3 parts. Tab 3A is the legislative update. I'll be going through that, recapping major actions of the General Assembly as they pertain to the Commission. And then in tab 3B, I'll be presenting the amendment to the calendar year work program. I will be asking for your approval of that amendment as we go through this tab today. And then in tab 3C, I'll be presenting the various research plans related to the legislation that was referred to us this session. So turning to page 3 in tab 3A, first of all, there were several actions taken by the General Assembly this year related to past recommendations and findings of the Commission, specifically related to 2 Commission reports and 1 staff report. The first of these was our 2010 Commission report, Safe Digging, Working Together to Prevent Damage to Underground Utilities. In this report, the Commission recommended that Tennessee Regulatory Authority and the Tennessee One Call System convene a stakeholder group to discuss ways to improve the state's underground utility damage laws. The legislature acted on this recommendation, passed Public Chapter 65, which created a 20-member Underground Utility Damage Prevention Advisory Committee, and they tasked that committee with providing recommendations on how to best comply with federal laws, rules, and regulations regarding preventing underground utility damage. This committee is to report back to the Governor, the Speaker of the Senate, the Speaker of the House, and the Comptroller by November 1st of this year. Next, the General Assembly acted on our February 2013 report, our recent report on eminent domain in Tennessee. In acting partly in response to our recommendation in that report that property owners should not be able to force local governments into binding arbitration, the House Civil Justice Committee voted against House Bill 103. Now, House Bill 103 was essentially very similar to Senate Bill 1266, which we had been asked to study in the report that became eminent domain in Tennessee. The committee voted down House Bill 103, which would have required local governments to submit to binding arbitration when requested by the property owners when there was a dispute over valuation. And I would add that our findings were cited during the discussion preceding the vote to that bill. And then finally, the House Business and Utility Subcommittee, acting in part on our January 2012 staff report, Appointment versus Election of Utility District Commissioners, voted against House Bill 691, which would require utility district boards with 1,600 or fewer customers, there being 5 of these boards in Lawrence County, to be governed by elected boards. In addition to acting on our past recommendations and findings, as the chairman said, the General Assembly also referred a number of bills to us this year. They actually referred 9 bills to us, 7 of which dealt with Public Chapter 1101 Acts of 1998. And the first of these was Public Chapter 441, which you'll find summarized on page 4 of tab 3A. And this, as amended, the final version of, or as passed and chaptered, Public Chapter 441 required TACIR to conduct a comprehensive review of Title VI, Chapters 51, dealing with municipal boundary changes, and Chapter 58, dealing with comprehensive growth plans. We have until January 14th of 2014 to complete the study. The Public Chapter 441, as I'm sure you've also heard, also put in place a moratorium on the annexation of agricultural and residential property, which was the moratorium went in effect on April 15th of this year and is in effect until May 15th of next year. Of course, there's been some confusion on this moratorium in the press. It, as I said, only applies to residential and agricultural property, and even though there were attempts by several counties to opt out of the chapter through amendments, the final version only allows one method to opt out, and that is if the municipality had already began the annexation prior to the moratorium going in place, and they could demonstrate that there would be serious financial difficulties from not completing the annexation before the moratorium is complete, they could petition the county legislature for approval to waive the requirements of the moratorium. So, now, most of the discussion dealing with the other dealing with annexation and growth boundaries and the issues in the other bills took place around the original bill that became Public Chapter 441, because there was already some understanding that these bills would be coming to summer study. And so most of the other bills I'm going to talk about here were referred en masse to us for study. So a lot of the guidance we received came about as a result of discussion on the original version of Public Chapter 441, which was Senate Bill 279 by Watson, House Bill 475 by Carter. And this would require a majority vote of qualified voters in the territory proposed for annexation prior to a municipality annexing within its urban growth boundary. Currently, in current law in Tennessee, as I'm sure you are all probably aware, there are two forms of annexation available to municipalities: annexation by ordinance and annexation by referendum. Not to step too much on Bill's toes from tab 5, but annexation and ordinance could either be initiated unilaterally by the municipality, or it can be initiated by the residents in the area proposing annexation. And several of the bills deal with different aspects of these types of annexations. So these bills were referred to TACIR for a couple of reasons. One was that there was as I already said, there was already a desire to address these issues comprehensively, similar to the way that Public Chapter 1101 had been addressed back in 1998. Also, there was some concern that the approach taken in 279 might be offering a one-size-fits-all approach to municipalities. There were, putting a referendum requirement on municipalities where there may not be concerns about annexation, where there's not been any disputes, and then a general feeling that the referendum had a good potential of passing, and there was a desire to step back a moment and look at the issue broader before action was actually taken. So the other bills that were referred to us, and there were 7 bills referred to us, and I'll discuss each of those, and then another bill that wasn't referred to us but that are related because of its relationship to chapters 51 and 58 that I'll also discuss. And the next of these, the first of these, Senate Bill 731 by Senator Watson and its House companion, House Bill 230 by Carter, also dealt with annexation by referendum. This was sent to us by the Senate State and Local Government Committee and taken off notice in the Local Government Subcommittee of the House. It was sent to us at the same time as Senate Bill 732, which I'll be discussing in a few minutes. This bill requires all annexations within the municipality's urban growth boundaries under an amended growth plan to be by referendum only and not by ordinance. Currently, under Chapter 58, a municipality can annex within its urban growth boundary either by ordinance or by referendum. If it wants to annex outside its urban growth boundary, it has to do so either by amending the boundary or by referendum. Next is another bill dealing with annexation by referendum, and this was House Bill 590 by Van Huss and its Senate companion, Senate Bill 869 by Crow. The bill was referred by the House Finance, Ways and Means Subcommittee, and actually referring to, it was sent to the, what was then being called the annexation calendar, which eventually became the group of bills that were sent to us for study. The original bill requires annexation ordinances to be approved by a vote of the majority of qualified voters residing in the territory proposed for annexation before it becomes operative. And this applies both to annexations initiated by the municipality and annexations initiated by the residents themselves. It further requires the municipalities to send copies of the proposed ordinances to the residents in the area to be annexed 90 days prior to the referendum. The bill was amended by Representative Van Huss in the House Local Government Committee, and the amendment changed the requirement so that the annexations, the referendum are only required on those annexations initiated by the municipality itself. So unilateral annexations, it doesn't require referendum for annexations initiated at the request of the residents. It also increased the notice period for the sending out the copies of the proposed ordinances to 180 days. And as I said, this was referred by the House Finance Ways and Means Subcommittee. Next are a couple of bills that were referred both by the House and the Senate, and this was, again, as the issue was picking up momentum, and we realized that a number of these bills were coming to us for summer study. The first of these deals with annexation of agricultural land. And it's Senate Bill 1316 by Bowling, House Bill 1249 by Van Huss. It was referred both by the Senate State and Local Government Committee and the House Finance Ways and Means Subcommittee. And it prohibits a municipality from annexing any land within its urban growth boundary that is zoned for agricultural use until there's a change triggered by request for a non-agricultural zoning designation or by the sale of the territory for some use other than agricultural purposes. Next was a bill dealing with notice of annexation, and this was also by Senator Bowling, Senate Bill 1381, and Representative Van Huss, House Bill 1319, again sent by Senate State and Local Government Committee and the House Finance Ways and Means Subcommittee. The Senate version and the original House version require municipalities to mail a copy of an annexation ordinance or resolution to each property owner in the area proposed for annexation at least 90 days prior to proposed annexation date, and they also require any municipality annexing by ordinance to hold a minimum of 3 public informational meetings. This was amended in the House Local Governments Committee twice. The first, reducing the number of public informational meetings to just 1, but requiring that property owners be sent notice of the time, date, and location of that meeting. And then the second amendment requiring that the notice be sent by certified mail, return receipt requested. Now we come to the Public Chapter 462 dealing with Plan of Services. Now this chapter was not referred to us. Obviously it was passed and chaptered. And the chapter itself, as passed, requires municipalities whose annexations become effective by court order to send written notice to all newly annexed property owners by first-class mail. What we're actually interested, though, in this was the sections 5 and 6 of the original bill, Senate Bill 1054 by Kelsey, House Bill 1263 by Dale Carr. These were deleted from the final version of the bill, but they do relate to the comprehensive study we're doing with chapters 51 and 58. These sections would have simplified the plan of services requirement imposed on annexing municipalities and by deleting the provisions that have been in the law since the 70s, thereby easing the annexation burden on cities. And then turning to page 6, we are to the last 2 of the bills referred to us related to annexation and growth boundaries. The first of these is Senate Bill 732 by Watson with its House Bill Companion 231 by Carter. This was referred by Senate, State, and Local Government Committee and was deferred in the House Calendar and Rules. Restricts the ability of mayors of municipalities that have not already annexed all the territory within their urban growth boundary to propose amendments to growth plans and to serve on coordinating committees reconvened or reestablished to amend growth plans. So in other words, until they annex everything in their current growth plan, they can't amend or serve on a committee to amend that growth plan. And then finally, Senate Bill 613 by Yeager with its House Bill Companion 1035 by Littleton specifies that the mayor of a municipality may propose to amend only the urban growth boundary of the mayor's municipality, and a county mayor or county executive may propose to amend only the boundary between a planned growth area and a rural area. So you can't touch mine, I can't touch yours. It also clarifies the procedures for amending growth plans. All other proposals to change growth plans are deemed as revisions, which require resolutions by either the county legislative body or the governing bodies of municipalities containing at least half the population living in the municipalities. Any questions on these before and again, we're going to be going into a little bit more detail on these or putting them in broader context of the study in tab 5.
Cliff, are any of the bills consumed by others? Or is there any one bill that's broad enough to eliminate consideration of the others, or they all have sufficient differences
they all have enough of a difference to be considered independently, but they all also do relate to the comprehensive study of 441. And I should have mentioned that we, in addition to looking at the comprehensive study as directed by the General Assembly with 441 and including these bills in that review, we also see this as merging, if you will, with the study that was directed by the Commission at our February meeting to look at Public Chapter 1101 Acts of 1998 in more detail.
And again, for the benefit of our newer members and those who may not have focused on it, we had taken this up. We began talking about it late last year, in terms of the fact that we were approaching year 15 of the 20-year growth plan under the original Chapter 1101, and we had discussion here wondering where folks were, where counties and municipalities were with the plans that had been adopted some years ago. A few counties have amended their growth plans, but most probably have not, and they're still operating under the original plan. And Mayor Huffman brought up the hold harmless provisions. There's a 15-year trigger that you'll all recall on the hold harmless for property taxes, and so we all realized it was time to stop and take stock of how effective the planning process had been. That probably is something that should have been done at periodic intervals along the way. So here we are, roughly at year 15, and then, as fate would have it, when we convened and came into session, we had these bills and a number of issues related to them arise, and so the timing was good because we'd already talked about doing this, and this will help us sort of focus our reviews in that context. But thank you.
So turning to the other two bills referred to us for study by the General Assembly this year, the first deals with water rates, or really water and sewer rates for non-city residents. And this is House Bill 600 by Timothy Hill, and its Senate companion, Senate Bill 735 by Green. As introduced, it prohibits Johnson City from raising water rates on consumers located outside the city limits within Sullivan County 50% or higher than the rate charged to consumers located within the city limits. This bill came out of concerns in the Piney Flats area of Sullivan County by consumers in that area that were customers of the city water service living in the county, that their rates were what they felt to be arbitrarily and excessively high. There was a good deal of discussion on this on the floor of the House Local Government Committee. The Johnson City had a number of concerns as well concerning the potential effect on their ability to meet their debt requirements if these water rates were lowered outside the city, and also about the potential effect of treating other customers living outside the county, outside the city, differently than those customers living in Piney Flats, because the customers in Piney Flats aren't the only customers outside Johnson City and Sullivan County. There was no limit put on no due date put on this report, though our intent is to have a draft report to the Commission for review and comment at our October meeting this year, and a final report for your approval at our December meeting. And that brings us to the other bill that was already mentioned, which is the bill on insurance in lieu of surety bonds, or Senate Bill 624 by the elegant Senator Norris, with its eloquent. Sorry, yeah. Both. It was both. Okay. With its House companion, House Bill 1004 by Todd. This, as originally written, would authorize any governmental entity to purchase insurance policies to protect against breach of fiduciary duty by public officials and employees. The Senate State and Local Government Committee amended the bill to direct the Commission to study the issue of possible insurance policy coverage satisfying the requirement of official surety bond. The idea of this insurance in lieu of surety bonds was characterized in the discussion as a potentially innovative alternative to surety bonds, and the question was put to us as whether it is a suitable alternative.
Senator Kyle.
I mean, I hadn't taken insurance law in 40 years, but I don't see how that's contrary to the entire concept of insurance. You can't insure against a willful, wanton act. A deliberate and intentional act is not insurable. That's why we have surety bonds. That's the difference between a bond, which is for deliberate acts, and insurance, which is not for deliberate acts. I mean, insurance is for mistakes, errors,
whatever. But if someone decides to take the payroll and go to Tunica, which has happened, by the way, in my part of the state, that is not an insurable offense. I mean, that's just I would hope that the commission would, if y'all would get with me afterwards, there are people in the state who really have a great working knowledge of the surety bond industry, which is really one of the most misunderstood aspects of finance that you can have.
And we certainly wish to speak to as many experts as possible on this, and we will get with you, Senator, after the meeting. We're still very early in our research process on this one and looking at what is out there, what other states are doing, and whether there are any approaches like this even available, and whether or not they're suitable, viable alternatives.
Maybe a very simple answer, yeah. But thank you. Oh. Vice Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Cliff, all of these previous bills on annexation, many refer to referendums. Do they require just a simple majority in each referendum that's mentioned?
As far as I know, I'll have to verify that, though.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right, turning to tab 3B, we have Amendment 1 to the TACIR work program for calendar year 2013. A lot of this is going to look very similar to what we just went through, because the first couple of pages take those bills that were referred to us by the General Assembly, put them in the shape of studies that we're going to do. As we did last year, we've grouped like bills together, and rather than doing a separate study on each bill, we do comprehensive studies on the issue behind the bills. And the first of these is the Municipal Boundary Changes and Comprehensive Growth Plans study, which is laid out on pages 2 and 3 and part of 4. And then you'll see on the bottom of page 4, we also have the water rates and the insurance in lieu of surety bond studies. So these will all be added to the calendar year work program so that we can respond to the General Assembly's request. Also, starting on page 5 of the work program, the other change is we've gone back and updated the status on the bills that we were already working on. And you'll see, for example, eminent domain on the top of page 5, the status is now complete. And then land use, I would also point out halfway down on that same page, you've already seen the draft report on that. You'll be receiving a final report for your approval tomorrow. Likewise, on page 7, you will be receiving the final report on the fire service report tomorrow. So pending any questions on the revised work program, I would ask at this time for your approval.
Thank you. Representative Odom, you're right.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And my question is really going to be directed to you. And since we've got several annexation issues to deal with, will we be developing will our studies be of each one of those bills individually? And will we report on each bill individually, or will we be trying to do a more comprehensive review of annexation that includes, obviously, or addresses each of the issues that are included in all of the bills?
Representative, I'm glad you asked the question, because that sort of goes to why I asked Cliff whether any of these bills are sort of encompassed in, whether there's one overreaching bill, because the 441 actually charges TACIR with coming back with a comprehensive report and essentially recommendations.
Exactly.
The other bills don't necessarily do that, or the means by which they were referred to us did not require that. So I suspect that there's a lot of overlap, but that, and I'll yield to Lanice and to Cliff and others if there's a preference, but I think it's going to be a comprehensive report that does what we're charged to do under 441, and along the way probably picks up the issues that were surfaced in those other bills.
The only thing I would add to that is we see those other bills as indicators of some of the issues that we need to look at, but they're just part of the comprehensive review.
Yeah, some are limited to the urban growth areas, some are limited to outside the urban growth areas, some are limited to the phase they're in of growth areas and the like. But I think that's how it will shake out. And we do need to, are there other questions on that, on the amendment?
And I will be going over the research plan for that study in a little bit of detail, and that might help clear up some of those questions as well.
We need to take action on it, and if there's no further discussion, all in favor, yeah, I'm sorry. Oh, yes, Mayor, sorry, apologize.
Mr. Chairman, I had a question on the research, and that's on page 9. You've got 3 universities, Tennessee State, Middle Tennessee State, University of Memphis, that work research. Are those all ongoing? Are those quarterly reports? Are they just as needed? I notice you've got the economic indicators from MTSU. You've got strategies supporting local economic development. Do you just call on them from time to add to, or kind of how do each one of those universities work with us on those things?
We maintain relationships with certain universities that work on the particular issues that the Commission tends to take up. From time to time, we've made grants to the University of Tennessee to work on some economic studies and so forth. Depends. Each one of them comes to us a little bit differently. Usually, they start with conversations that we're having with them about particular areas of concern, and a professor may have an interest in something that the Commission has on its agenda from time to time, and has a proposal to look at that kind of thing. With the tracking of Tennessee's economy, this one was initiated by Dr. Green as trying to respond to people's need to know what's going on with the recession and the recovery from that recession. MTSU had already been doing some similar work for THDA, had a contract with them and has had for some time. This kind of piggybacked on that, and what we do is give them a grant each year to keep their website up to date, a website that recognizes the partnership between us and them and includes information on employment, on housing starts, building permits, and so on and so forth. And we actually pick up that information from time to time and incorporate it into various reports that we do, including one that was released recently on jobs in the economy and the recovery. The project with TSU was a proposal by TSU that resulted from conversations over probably the last 5 or 6 years about concerns that we have some counties that are economically stronger than other counties, that we have cities and counties that compete with each other to recruit industry, and the idea that working together in a region, across counties and cities combining, may be able to take advantage of scale and assets that each one may not have individually, but collectively that they have. The cluster concept in economics, where you may have an area of the state that's focused and strong in a particular industry, and how they might work together. What we're trying to do with this one, and we have had discussions with staff at the Department of Economic and Community Development to help make sure that we mesh this with the governor's initiatives on jobs in the economy throughout the regions that he's established in the state, is to look at the assets that the various counties have available to them, look at the experiences that they've had, and try to come up with some ideas based on what they see, both by surveying local officials to say what their challenges have been and what their reaction to them has been, what their successes have been, as well as looking at the data to see what we can learn about the direction that they're headed in. So they just... if that gives you an idea of the breadth and the way these things come to us, that's pretty much, we evaluate each one based on the utility of it, the usefulness we think that it will have to local officials and policymakers. And so we present those to you in the work program. These are all already established projects. None of these is a new one. But each year we may bring you something and ask for your blessing for us to do it.
And the school siting and the land use, since we're going to build another new school in Rutherford County, and land use, is that a...
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Is that a standing report, or is that a...
That's a single report. It's a project that's been going on for a number of years.
So is it available?
It's still in progress. We're hoping to have the results of it by fall. by fall.
Fall.
The University of Memphis has had a little bit of trouble with some of the staff that they assigned to it and the resources that they had available to it. So it's taken them longer to complete the project than we initially had hoped. But again, this one's been carried in the work program for a while, but it is a single report.
2 points here. I think it's worthy of discussion that since we're amending the plan or proposing to amend it, that we talk to you all, Cliff, Lanice, about staffing. This is a major change in the program of work given the additional bills, the 9 total bills, and I think the commission members should know the extra lengths, what changes you're having to make and adjustments, if you will, to meet this schedule, because it is a rigorous schedule given the previously approved scope of work. So I'll yield to either of you or both. Lanice.
I will say that the volume of work is going to put a major strain on staff. It will be difficult for us, as it will for you, having to attend multiple additional meetings this year to work through the process and produce the kind of thorough and credible report that we believe we're known for and people expect and should have, particularly with the assignment of the breadth of Title VI chapters 51 and 58. I'm not sure everyone understands the breadth, particularly of 51, which deals with more than just annexation. It deals with call it simply de-annexation. It also deals with the potential for combining cities and adjustments of boundaries between existing cities. It helps us that we were sent specific bills, though, because we know areas that we can focus on that we will need to go more in depth on, but it is going to be a challenge for staff to meet the timeline that we have established for producing the report in January. So it's going to be especially important to have those July and August meetings as part of our information gathering process and to get the reaction of commission members as we go along so that we can anticipate better the kind of report that you're going to want us to write. We'll need to bring the first draft to you for review and comment in October in order to have enough time to complete a final draft in December, and we'll need to be able to get that draft approved by you in December in order to have it out and ready in January. It always takes us a little bit of time to go through the process of getting a report. Typically, you're going to tell us some revisions to make to it, even at that final one. And from time to time, you'll approve a report subject to our revising it in a certain way. So we have to have time to work those revisions into the report, to do the proofing and the editing. We have to have time for Ms. Gibson to do the laying out of it and the additional proofing that must be done as a result of that in order to actually publish the report. In the case of this particular report, we're considering making printed copies of it, and that adds to the time as well. So in order to meet that January 14 deadline, we're going to have a final report in December. And that really, we really only have a few months to get you that first draft. Right. So we've assigned to that work. Carrie Courtney is the project lead. Leah Eldridge is the research manager, and Leah's been working with issues related to this for a number of years. As a consultant, we've assigned Bill Terry, whom you know is an expert in growth planning. However, it's important to understand that he's not an expert in annexation. So we may need additional resources there. We've got Bob Morio, who is new on the staff but has some background in these issues. And am I leaving anyone out? And, of course, Cliff and I are intimately involved in the process all along the way. The panels that we're talking about having in July and August will be extremely beneficial to us, but so will the questions and concerns that you raise and the discussions that you have in order for us to anticipate that and incorporate that into the report.
Have our members had an opportunity for input into the participants in the panels?
We have talked to the sponsor. We started with the sponsors of the legislation. And as part of our research process, and you'll see this reflected in the plans behind tab 3C and in the comments that Cliff will make about them, we begin each project by talking to the sponsors of the legislation and asking them whether there is anyone that we should be talking to. So we're getting some ideas from that. The panels that we've set up, 2 of them are for local government officials, and we've asked TML to nominate people for the panel that's representing the municipalities. We've asked the County Services Association to offer people for the panel that is going to represent county interests. And for the panel, we're asking everyone for ideas for the panel for non-government members. We've got a couple of people already signed up for that one. One of them is a Mr. Haupt who lives in the Mount Juliet area and is part of a network in the private sector who are concerned about annexation issues. We want to bring that perspective to the Commission. We don't want anybody's point of view to be left out of this public process. We've got a representative from Farm Bureau going to appear on that panel, and we have 3 or 4 more spots that we're looking to fill. We want to be sure we cover the variety of points of view of people from outside of government. So we're trying to make sure that we get the economic development point of view, for instance, and one idea that we're pursuing is asking someone from the Tennessee Chamber of Commerce and Industry to join that panel. But we welcome any other ideas that you may have, any suggestions.
Generally, the staff does a good job in choosing panelists, and I'm sure you will this time too, but I bring it up so we get the overview and commend to any of you who want to discuss with Lanice or Cliff additional panelists. I've done that a little bit, which is what prompted my question, and I've had to remind myself that there's a slight difference between what we do on panels here for input and the edification of TACIR as compared to what we do when actual bills go back to the General Assembly, because we have hearings all over again. So there are all kinds of people I can think of that would be good panelists, but you know, I'll make sure they have opportunities, if they're not included here, to testify when we're really live with legislation going through the General Assembly. Are there any questions on that subsection there, that subpoint? I had 2 other points. One, I want to make sure that the work plan does cover Senator Kyle's concern, his question expressed at a previous meeting about the effect of foreclosure on blight. That is now included in our plan of work, but I don't know that we've highlighted it appropriately. That point with another point, which is sort of a rhetorical question. Is there anything that's on the original work plan that, given the new workload or the proposed amendment, you'd like to ask us to reconsider and put off a while? I have not discussed that with staff at all, but it occurs to me this is a time to do it, given the press of events. And you haven't asked me to, but I know you'll just do whatever we've asked you to do and you'll get it done somehow. But is there something that we should consider deferring?
Well, if you look at the items under research support, a lot of none of those things have, starting on page 8. None of those things came to us from the legislature. None of them have timelines on them. Many of them were suggested to you by staff rather than by your request, and they are a lower priority. They're by nature a lower priority than issues that are assigned by commission and by the legislature, of course. There is one item that we have that was assigned by the legislature that we place lower priority on, and we need your feedback on this, and that's on page 7, homeowners associations. This came to us by resolution of the House in 2012 by Representative Gary Moore from the Nashville area, who is no longer a member of the General Assembly, but I know there's interest from other directions in this particular one, and it directed the Commission to study the responsibility of homeowners associations to ensure their obligations in homeowners associations rules and regulations. And the interest in Nashville came out of the May 2010 flood. and a concern that some of the homeowners associations were not maintaining adequate insurance to rebuild some of the common areas as a result of the flood. That one is one that we have a research plan written for. Carrie Courtney was the lead research associate on that. We've moved her over to the to Public Chapter 441, and I have to tell you that I don't think we can accomplish this one, and it was due to the 108th General Assembly, which would mean they've already had their first session. They're about to have their second session starting next January, and it would be difficult for us to accomplish that as well as the others. The two that have been, the two bills that were assigned to us by the legislature that are not included in the 441 study, we've got those laid out in our plan, and we've got staff assigned to them, and we'll be able to get those done. The additional assignment that came from the Commission on the issue of the effect of foreclosure on remedying blight, we have a research plan for that, and we plan to track that one along with the Public Chapter 441 project, and I think we're staffed adequately for that. But we're really tight in all of that, and again, I don't know that by shifting more of our staff over to Public Chapter 441, we would necessarily be able to do a better report for you, because quite honestly, some of those things we need to just think about for a while. You have to gather the information, understand it, ponder it. Cliff and I need to understand it as well as the rest of staff do, and more people can gather more information, but for one person to understand it all and feel confident in what we're presenting, which is what each one of us has to do and what each one of you will want to do, adding a lot more staff to that would just pile up the information even higher. And this, quite honestly, having 5 or 6 people to work on it may cause us to focus a little bit better and keep that narrow.
Right.
So
then where we stand is that we have before us for consideration an amendment to the work plan that was previously approved, rather than ask for an amendment to the amendment to address the question of the homeowners associations. Why don't we just wait until our July meeting and see how things are coming together? It may be necessary technically, for us at the beginning of the second half of the 108th General Assembly to have a resolution amending the prior resolution. I don't really know. I haven't thought about it. I want to be precise about it and do it justice, but it may also be that there is no longer sufficient interest in that issue. There are other issues concerning homeowners associations that have recently arisen in my district as a coincidence. So it may be that we want to take a slightly different look, but we'll have to go about it in the appropriate way. And I'm sure that the Commission and the General Assembly will accommodate TACIR, given the press of these other affairs that we really want to have answered by January 14th. So I just raised that for your consideration. What is before us is the amendment to the work plan as presented by Cliff. I'll move it actually to get it before us and ask if there's a second. All right, been properly seconded by Representative Odom. Is there any further discussion about the amendment to the plan of work? And hearing none, seeing none, all in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed or abstaining? It's unanimous. Great. Good job, Cliff. Thank you. All right, go ahead.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, moving on to tab 3C, you find the actual research plans for the studies that were referred to us by the General Assembly, and as Lenise said, also the research plan for the blight foreclosure study that was referred to us by the Commission. I'm going to briskly walk through the research plan for the municipal boundary changes and comprehensive growth plans study, partly to familiarize our new members with our research process, and partly just to make sure that there are no questions with this research plan and show where the panels tie into it, etc. And then I'll be happy to answer any questions you may have about the other studies as well, and I'll give you an update on when we expect to complete each of those studies.
Thank you.
So, as you can see on page 1 of tab 3C, this is the research plan for the municipal boundary changes and comprehensive growth plan study. Well, as Lenise mentioned, Leah Eldridge is our research manager for it. Carrie Courtney is the lead research associate, and Bill and Bob are also working on this. All of our research plans, we start with identifying the purpose of the study, and as we've discussed at length here, the purpose of this is dealing with a comprehensive review of Title VI, Chapters 51 and 58. Turning to page 2, down at the bottom, after we identify the purpose and identify all the legislation associated with the study, we make an attempt to define the problem. This is an ongoing, reiterative process. We define the problem, then we redefine the problem, we redefine it as we go through, and we find out more information. But the idea here is to get at more than just what the bill that was referred to us was, but what are the underlying issues, especially when we have multiple bills, what are the common issues underlying the various pieces of legislation?
And so to be fair, we could call this define the issue rather than the problem?
Easily.
The challenge? Okay. Yeah. I mean, some of us think it is a problem, but yes, yeah, opportunity depends on, I guess, where you sit, but okay.
And then after we've defined the problem, we go through the step 2, the assemble some evidence. This is the gathering information thing that Lenise was talking about, and as she mentioned, absolutely integral to it in this particular research plan are the panels that we'll be having at our July and August meetings, where we bring in various stakeholders from inside and outside government and get all those various points of views on issues related to annexation and issues related to growth boundaries. You see, though, that what we've done here is we've broken out our list of questions, things that we know we need to know as a minimum in order to address the broader issues or the broader problem. And then in this case, we've broken it out into those questions dealing with the chapter, the title and chapters in general, and then starting at the bottom of page 3, those dealing with annexation generally, and then as you see on page 4, we have questions related to annexation by a referendum, more specifically annexation of agricultural land, issues related to the notices, questions related to plans of service, and then questions related to comprehensive growth planning apart from those that are specific to annexation. And this is all of our attempt to make sure that we're asking the right kinds of questions to do the comprehensive review that we've been asked to do.
Yes, sir. Senator Henry.
Mr. Chairman, I gather all these bills rest in the state and local government committees, the two bodies. Is that correct?
Not all of them. I think some had come from Finance, Ways and Means, or the equivalent.
Well, what I was wondering is, if they rest in one or two committees, and we talk about what we're going to do and what we're going to research, should we at some point ask the chairman or the staff of those standing committees whether this covers what they want to know?
Senator Henry, I think that's a point well made, and we had Chairman Hill is in and out from the House Local Government Committee, and Senator Yeager may not be present in person, but I know he's keeping an eagle eye and has staff. There you are, right behind. Hi. Okay, so he's represented. The committee is represented, but good point, and we will do so.
Certainly. So what we're doing while we're gathering this information is we're looking for things for approaches that lend themselves as alternatives to addressing the issues at hand, and that's the next step of the process. Step 3 is constructing alternatives. So we know that we have one of the alternatives we always have is the status quo, not making any changes to the current law, and then we know the other alternatives that we always bring to the table are any specific alternatives introduced by the legislation that we're studying. In this case, since what we're studying is a comprehensive review of the Title 6, 51, and 58, it's a little bit more complicated than that. But then what we're doing is we're going through the process of gathering information. We're looking at other approaches that might lend themselves to alternatives, things that have been done in other states, things that are in the literature, ideas that are brought to us from the various stakeholders and experts that present at the panels, the ideas that come out of this commission, ideas that come out of going back and speaking to the various committees and subcommittees. And that's where we draw the alternatives. At the same time we're gathering that information, we're looking for the information we need to evaluate those alternatives, and that's what feeds into step 4 of the process. Select the criteria, which is on page 6. We have kind of generic criteria already lined out in the research plan. We know that we're always interested in issues like efficiency, fairness and equity, cost, and political feasibility. But what we're doing as we're gathering information is we're looking for ways to take these generic terms and put some meat on them, to make them appropriate for the study we're doing, to actually define what we mean and how we would use these criteria to evaluate the outcomes that we look at in the next step, step 5. So what we do is in step 5 is we project the potential outcome for each of the alternatives that we're looking at for in terms of the criteria we've chosen to evaluate. And we use those then to compare them and make recommendations back to you, the Commission, on what we think the Commission should recommend in its report. One thing we've added in the research plans this year is, as you'll see on the bottom, or the last thing on page 7, is we now are revisiting steps 5 through 8 of the research plan. So we're going back and looking at the outcomes, the trade-offs, the decision, and revising the drafts to incorporate any feedback and recommendations that the Commission makes when you review the draft report. Now, we were doing that already. We're noting that we're doing that in the research plan. And then,
Cliff, I think I'm not sure. Under step 2, where you're assembling evidence, whether it's change of municipal boundaries, subtitle, or annexation, but make sure you assemble evidence of, for lack of a better term, the practical effect of annexation. I mean, you're sort of nibbling around it here, but there may be instances where annexing municipalities have become stronger. There may be where it's a wash, and you may find some where it's actually been a negative. I think that's something that ought to be considered.
And those are the kinds of things we are gathering, but we'll make sure that is incorporated. And then finally, on page 8 of that research plan, you'll see the timeline for the plan. And as already mentioned, on this particular report, we will have the draft to the Commission for review and comment in October, and the final report for your approval in December. The other research plan timelines for the House Bill 600 study on water and sewer rates, that's on the same timeline, so you'll see a draft of that in October and a final report in December. The insurance, insurance in lieu of surety bonds study, that's on actually a slightly quicker timeline, because it's just the issue's not as involved in detailed as the others. We expect to have a draft to you in August on that one and a final report in October. And then the blight foreclosure study, we'll have a draft report to you at the December meeting and a final report by January.
Okay. Mayor Bragg.
I sympathize with you. Obviously, we know why we get things on summer study because of a lot of things going on. On this House Bill 600, the water and sewer rates, we have a little different situation in Murfreesboro with the City of Murfreesboro Water and the consolidated utility districts, where we have city residents paying 2.5 times what next door neighbors are paying because they're in a different utility which has a much larger area. So that's always a concern when you look at these rates, and I'm sure you'll check that. Also, the final report is December 2014. Is that just a typo?
That would be a typo.
And the other question I had back to this annexation issue is the state has realigned their planning offices, I think, across the state. And I'm not sure what, if any, impact that has had on annexations in areas that use the state's planning departments for doing those kinds of things. Because ordinarily when you do have annexations, you've got plans involved. And I'm not sure anywhere is mentioned here regarding the realignment of the state's planning offices and what happened there.
That's a very good point. We'll be sure to include that.
Thank you, Mayor Bragg. Senator McNally.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a question on the foreclosure issue. One area that's caused me some concern, as well as other legislators, is that when a county or city is by statute has to foreclose on property because of non-payment of taxes, and usually it's a number of parcels in a subdivision or development, and then the city and county are stuck with holding the property, which is probably worth very little, and also a large number of homeowners' fees. And I was wondering if the foreclosure study would also look at that aspect.
I would expect it to. As we had a lengthy conversation with Senator Kyle regarding the study after it was sent to us, and we're interested broadly in the effect of blighted property and the difficulty and the effect of foreclosures on how that affects blighted areas and how it makes it difficult to address the blight because of the foreclosure properties and also because of the high administrative costs associated with dealing with foreclosures and the higher lending costs associated with areas with a lot of blight. So I see those as all kind of related issues. I would imagine we would touch on that.
Thank you.
Further to that point, I recall, although not specifically, but think we passed legislation not too long ago that sets up the opportunity. It's almost like a pilot program for blighted property. And I just came to mind as you were talking here. I think it provides an opportunity for one to acquire property and make a payment for, sort of compromise the back tax issue, but to get the property back in circulation. Jim, Senator Kyle, do you remember something along those lines? I mentioned that because staff, does anybody out there, am I?
No, I mean, that is what is preventing the rehabilitation of the property is two things: unknown debt and the back taxes. We've got some constitutional issues on forgiveness of that. Perhaps you could offer a constitutional amendment, Senator Norris. You're good at that.
Leave that to one of your friends.
Senator, I believe what you're referring to is the pilot project in Oak Ridge.
Maybe that's what I'm remembering.
Yeah, and then Bill and I were just we actually addressed that in our last report on blight.
Which why I'm thinking of it. Okay.
So we have discussed that pilot program in some detail, and that study was the springboard that led to this project because this was a little bit more specific look at foreclosure and blight.
Got it. Thank you for getting me reoriented, Brother McBride.
Question. While you're studying 1101, are you going to do a comprehensive study of the entire bill, or are we just going to limit it to annexation? I know we opened it at one time to study the whole thing, and since hopefully it's wide open, because we need, in my opinion, need to specifically look at the mandatory JECDB meetings. We're at the point in our county where we have them just for the sake of meeting, and we sit down, we talk about the weather, and we say have a good day and leave. And if you're going to have a mandatory meeting, you can do it annually and then meet as needed if you've got a project, but it's hard to get people to come on a regular basis when we're not going to really do anything.
No, we were directed to do a conference study of both Title 51 with annexation and Title 58 with Public Chapter 1101. And we had also already been directed by the Commission to take a close look at Public Chapter 1101. So we're definitely going to be looking at a comprehensive.
Yeah, good point, Mayor McBride. Other questions, comments? Cliff?
You're almost done with Mr. Chairman. If we could turn to tab 4. Tab 4 is just a list of tab 4 is the list of major achievements by the Commission for the fiscal year that comes to an end at the end of this month, fiscal year 2012-2013. This is provided to you just for information purposes. This information will be assimilated into our broader biennial report next year, so you'll be seeing it again. But just to lay out what we have done in the past fiscal year, going through it quickly, we completed the study on House Bill 472, which is the one permitting registered voters who reside outside their precinct listed as their permanent address at the time of election to vote in statewide elections only. We completed that report and made a recommendation. It concluded that current law already provides voters who temporarily reside outside their county several options for casting their ballots. We also completed a report on dealing with blighted properties in Tennessee's communities. We were just discussing that. And it concluded that there are a number of laws already on the books in Tennessee that seem to be adequate in dealing with blight. And it lays out those various programs here in the recap. And then, as I already mentioned, we completed the report on eminent domain in Tennessee. and our annual report on Tennessee Valley Authority payments in lieu of taxes. In addition to completing these studies, we've published 8 reports, briefs, or web publications listed on page 3. This list does not include the land use or fire study that hopefully will be approved tomorrow, so those will be added to this list once approved. And then we provided one presentation. Actually, our executive director did this presentation on the role of, well, 2 presentations, I'm sorry. The first was Facts, Fear, and the Future, which was at the Tennessee County Services Association Annual Conference in October 2012. Executive Director Rourke Patrick gave that presentation. And then also the role of the Tennessee Advisory Commission on Intergovernmental Relations, and that was given to the House Local Government Committee. Responded to numerous requests for information, administered 12 contracts, and the 9 development district contracts. These are the contracts that we have with the DDs to help us, to gather the information that we need to prepare the annual infrastructure story, annual infrastructure project inventory. Sorry, and that's a long-term ongoing partnership we've had with the development districts, and then also the MTSU study that Lanice already mentioned, and the TSU study on sustainable competitiveness. If I could pause just to give a quick advertisement on that for any of the city officials who are going to the Tennessee Municipal League Conference starting this weekend. The 2 primary researchers on this project, Dr. Streams and Dr. Ghosh, will be presenting a panel on this study during that conference on Monday, I believe Monday morning or early Monday afternoon, but it's in the agenda. So feel free to stop by and get more an update on what came out of our listening sessions we had earlier this year. And then turning to page 5, you'll see our achievements broken out by policy area. And that's the update on our major achievements for this fiscal year.
Well, thank you, Cliff. It's helpful. It's really helpful to see this condensed in this fashion, and it's a tremendous amount of work. I don't know whether it includes any of the contractual response. I know we have the 12 contracts that you administer. We are also under an obligation to assist the Department of Education, for example.
And that's in there as well.
Is this here? Is it? I don't know if it's listed separately, but
it is.
But you do a tremendous amount of work, and you're to be commended for it. And members of the commission, you should take advantage of this where you feel like it suits you. But I mean, you're to be credited with this good work and the oversight of it as well. I've thought recently about the opportunities that all this presents for us to share this kind of information with our constituents. I don't do that regularly. A lot of it, if not all of it, is online. Some of it is in hard copy, but it's accessible. And as I'd mentioned at the outset, just before Senator McNally came in, we are now live video streaming these meetings, and so they also will be archived. But it's all about openness and transparency and availability to our constituents all across the state. This work product is too, and so I commend it to your review and your consideration to share with others. Thank you, Cliff.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Good job. Thank you very much.
Since you're all warmed up now, I'll be followed by Bill Terry with tab 5.
A perfect segue. Mr. Terry, welcome aboard. Welcome back. And I know you've met our new members, and
I have
talked to them. I've served on TACIR probably longer than I should have. I've had a lot of fun at Bill Terry's expense, because Bill and our universes intersect, fortunately, as a result of TACIR and the happenings at the General Assembly. But he knows about a lot of stuff that we just normally don't think about. So I give him a hard time about this, and I know how much he's looking forward to consulting with us on the following topic, but feel free to give him a hard time. Bill?
Everybody else does. Why not?
Yeah.
Started now?
We'll keep a lot of those stories in the closet.
Welcome.
Mr. Chairman, Director Patrick, members of the Commission, I'm here again. As noted, we've already discussed this tab quite a bit, so I don't know how much more I need to go into. Do I have a time limit?
Anything further? No. Just watch our eyes, Bill. Just watch our eyes, okay?
Okay. Particularly Mayor Bragg, Mayor McBride, they're going to keep tabs on me. Okay, this is a preliminary report on the Tennessee Growth Policy Act, Public Chapter 1101, Acts of 1998. I'll be as brief as possible, but we may be here for a while. The TACIR staff, of course, is continuing work on the Commission's request from the February meeting to review the status of local government's 20-year growth plans, determine the status of plans at the end of 20 years, analyze potential improvements to the planning process. Of course, Cliff has already discussed the 108th General Assembly and all the bills that referred, and particularly Public Chapter 441. This preliminary report is broken down under 3 headings. First heading is amendments to annexation in Public Chapter 1101. And this is a kind of historical approach to all the bills that have come up over the years. Close to 90 bills have attempted to amend Title VI, Chapter 51, and Title VI, Chapter 58. No action was taken on the majority of the bills, but 26 passed, 6 failed, and 27 referred to Commission for study, this Commission. Of the 26 bills that passed, we have grouped under 12 bullet points with a brief description. And I'll just highlight a couple of those, 3 or 4 of those bills. 7 of those bullet points address annexation. And of those 7 bullet points, it involves 18 different bills. Of those 18 bills, 5 required more parties to receive notice, and some parties who already received notice to receive it earlier. It's probably a pretty important approach. Another important bill, I think, in this list is the one on issues related to annexation and taxes. One of those bills addressed the issue of that 15-year moratorium, and I mean hold harmless provision for counties, and how that amount of money would be determined. It would be reserved for the county for 15 years. Of the 5 bullets that address Chapter 58, which is the growth management plan, one of those is an important approach. This was the bill that was passed to make it a little bit easier to amend a growth plan by specifying detailed procedures on how the growth plan would be amended and how a coordinating committee could be reestablished. And previously that was not all that clear, and so that was passed. I see you motioning to Sam, I guess a colleague. And then there was a bill on joint economic and community development boards that you have addressed, and I'll talk a little bit about that. And also, if anybody wants to interrupt me and ask a question, feel free to. The 6 bills that failed included 4 that would have required additional notice and limited municipalities' ability to annex by requiring a referendum, eliminating the right to annex by ordinance based on the property owner's initiative, and imposing stricter limitations on court annexation before the approval of growth plan. That particular provision no longer applies because all counties who are required to have growth plans have approved growth plans. One bill would have prohibited counties that are in Federal Clean Air Act non-attainment areas from proposing planned growth areas that included certain agricultural property. And that agricultural property was Class 1 and Class 2 soils, which are high-quality soils and related to an issue in East Tennessee. One bill would have extended the deadline for localities to submit growth plans required for grant eligibility, and that no longer applies as well. 27 bills were referred to this commission for study, most of them by the 103rd and 104th General Assemblies. That covered the period of time from 2003 to 2006. Of that 27, the commission recommended 8 as drafted and 1 with some modifications. The commission adopted an alternative set of recommendations for that 1 bill. 6 of the bills were referred by committees of the 103rd General Assembly. 3 of the recommended bills were enacted in 2005. These are bills that this commission recommended. Public Chapter 411 amended the law to require annexing municipalities to prepare a plan of services for growth for areas proposed for annexation by referendum, and to notify the county mayor in all cases. Public Chapter 278 revised the proceedings and authority of dispute resolution panels, and Public Chapter 246 limited the ability of municipalities to annex in other municipalities' urban growth boundaries. The Commission adopted an alternative set of recommendations for a fourth bill, Senate Bill, House Bill 2855. This bill would have permitted JECDBs, Mayor McBride, to meet only as needed. The Commission recommended, though, that the number of executive committee meetings be reduced from 8 to 4. The county mayor or city mayor or manager should be given the authority to appoint an alternate. The alternate should have certain types of education and experience, and that the law should require a minimum of one of the executive committee meetings held each quarter. Public Chapter 245, enacted in 2005, reflected these alternative recommendations of the Commission. Two other bills, which related to growth plans and consistency requirements, plus 12 more, were referred back to the Commission by the 104th General Assembly. Of those 14, the Commission recommended only 3. One gave greater latitude in certifying existing boards to serve as JECDBs. One required municipalities to notify property owners of proposed annexation. And one prohibited annexation of land subject to a permanent conservation easement if it was amended to give special consideration for land subject to conservation easements in the designation of growth boundaries and rural areas. The General Assembly took no action on the first bill and referred the remaining 2 bills back to the Commission. Because of a lack of consensus, there were no recommendation made on these bills sent for study for a second time. A single bill on lawsuits to challenge annexations was referred for study by the 105th General Assembly. No action was taken on this bill by the Commission. 2 bills on extraterritorial planning and zoning authority, which were referred by the 107th General Assembly, were discussed in the land use report coming up tomorrow and was discussed in the February meeting. That's kind of the historical approach to all of the amendments proposed.
And do your notes reflect annotations? In other words, if there were 6 bills that were adopted and 4 that weren't, could you give us the cites if we asked you? I mean, sidebar, you don't need to do it now.
I can't give it to you off the top of my head, but we have that information.
That's what we like.
Things slide off the top of my head, yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Next heading on this report is previous studies by this Commission. These issues are not new to TACIR, actually, of course. The Commission was first directed to review annexation issues in Tennessee 20 years ago, when the 98th General Assembly requested a study. That final report, Annexation Issues in Tennessee, a Commission report to the 99th General Assembly, published in 1995, included a thorough analysis of key topics that were identified during public hearings. There were 3 public hearings conducted during that period, 1 in each Grand Division of the state. The recommendation that came out of the publication was that annexation notices include a map of the area to be annexed. The 99th General Assembly passed that requirement in Public Chapter 283 of the Acts of 1995. We're getting closer to Public Chapter 1101. In 1997, the Speakers of the General Assembly established an ad hoc study committee on annexation and incorporation. This is in response to a Tennessee Supreme Court decision invalidating Public Chapter 98, which some of you remember, Acts of 1997, that allowed towns with as few as 225 persons to incorporate. The committee included 4 commission members, 4 members of this commission at that time. Those members were Representative Kisber and Rinks, Senators Rochelle and Hahn, none of which are in the General Assembly anymore. Those were the days. Yeah, those were the days. That committee, ad hoc committee, worked through the fall of 1997 and through 1998 legislative session to develop new legislation, and that legislation became Tennessee's Growth Policy Act, Public Chapter 1101, the Acts of 1998. A 1999 TACIR staff report entitled Implementation of Tennessee's Growth Policy Act, the History of PC 1101 and Early Stages of its Implementation, recapped the work of the ad hoc committee, summarized the Growth Policy Act, and reported progress towards its implementation, and you have a copy of that as well. The Growth Policy Act directed this commission to monitor its implementation and report regularly to the legislature. Thereafter, the General Assembly has tended to refer most growth-related legislation to the Commission for study. This was the case from 2004-2006 when a large number of bills were referred. And a detailed analysis of those bills appears in the docket book materials for the December 2004 meeting, which you have. There are also letters, Senate and House speakers in that material, and an excerpt from the 2006 report, Planning for Growth and Paying for It, TACIR recommendations on 2005 growth-related bills. Some of the issues identified in the 1995 report, annexation issues in Tennessee, are still around. They hadn't gone anywhere, and we're back again. The next section of this heading under this report is Other States' Laws. As you know, other state laws were mentioned during the debates in committee over various numbers of these bills. So staff has begun researching other state laws to identify possible alternatives to help resolve the issues, and the laws listed below include a brief summary of the preliminary results of those investigations. Other states use a number of annexation methods. The general laws authorizing municipalities to annex property fall under 5 major categories: annexation by consent, unilateral annexation, judicial annexation, legislative annexation, and quasi-legislative or administrative annexation. Well, we used to have legislative annexation here.
We thought that was something Senator McNally might be, a power he might be interested in exercising.
Yeah. Prior to 1955, most of it was done by private act. Under these categories, these annexation methods authorized by other states don't always fall neatly into these categories. There's a mixture. For example, Alaska requires annexation to be approved by a state boundary commission before submission to voters. Colorado requires most annexations to be approved by a petition signed by at least 50% of the landowners owning at least 50% of the land value in the territory to be annexed, or by an election in which only landowners vote. But it also allows a municipality to unilaterally annex territory that is already surrounded. Preliminary research that we've done in the other states' laws indicate 4 states allow municipalities to unilaterally annex property with few limitations. And these states are listed, by the way, in the footnotes. 13 states allow municipalities to unilaterally annex property in limited situations, such as when unincorporated territory is completely surrounded by the municipality, or unincorporated territory outside the corporate limits is owned by the municipality. 32 states require residents or landowners to approve an annexation. 2 states require annexation to be approved by a circuit court. 3 states have statutes that specifically provide that the state legislature may authorize a municipal annexation. 5 states require annexations to be approved by an entity other than the court or governing body of the annexing municipality, and 6 states require annexations to be approved by an entity other than the court or governing body of a municipality in addition to other requirements such as an election. There's a little sidebar here. Last fall, my wife and I happened to be vacationing in California. While there, I met this gentleman and spent quite a bit of time talking to him one afternoon, who happened to be a land use lawyer and also was a member of what's called in California the Local Agency Formation Commission. All counties in California are required to have that commission, and he served on the Napa County LAFC, I think is what they call it. Now, an interesting aspect of that is that before an annexation can occur, this commission has to go through a process of analyzing it and approving it. It has other responsibilities as well under state law, but in looking at annexations, I found this on their website, but he also told me this, that they really look at the financing capability of a municipality, the level of service that the municipality provides inside the city, and how comparable it will be in the newly annexed territory, what their bonded debt is, what the costs are to deal with the program, municipal service delivery reviews of all kinds, a planning requirement for an annexation plan, and interestingly enough, a city-county tax sharing agreement for when revenues change directions. I'm not saying that we should look at that in detail for Tennessee, but I thought it was an interesting approach at how another state handles annexations.
And do you recall how the members of that LAFC are selected?
The state law specifies membership of the commission, and I think it was, don't hold me to this, I think it was 7 members of the commission, including a municipal mayor, a county mayor, and some citizen members. There might be a different mix in there, and this particular guy that I talked to was one of the citizen members.
Appointed by some authority. Yeah.
Appointed by the city and the county. So that was interesting. And going back to the report, 8 New England and Mid-Atlantic states have little unincorporated territory, and annexation of unincorporated territory rarely occurs there. When it does occur, interestingly enough, municipalities are usually annexing territory in other municipalities, and I don't understand how that works. Annexation does not occur in Hawaii because it does not have municipalities. I'd like to close with a kind of a statement about Public Chapter 01, with your permission.
Proceed.
The purpose of Public Chapter 1101 was to identify the area where a city, and the growth boundaries, to identify the area where the city will grow, and logically the territory will become a part of the city in the future. A detailed process is spelled out in the law about how that is to occur. Coordinating committee has to be appointed to work to serve the whole county. Each entity, all the cities and the county, are required to do certain types of studies. The word in the law is shall do certain types of studies and provide certain types of information before recommending the growth boundary. Each entity, city and county, was required to conduct 2 public hearings. After the plans are recommended to the coordinating committee of the county, the coordinating committee had to conduct 2 public hearings. So at the time that these plans were going on, there was opportunity for people to get involved if they chose to do so. And of course, a lot of people didn't really know about it, and maybe not much participation took place. But in any case, the plans were approved, and with the idea that these annexation issues and planning issues that were developing all through the 1990s and culminating in the Tiny Towns Act could be helped towards solution by Public Chapter 1101. So that's kind of where we are now. I don't know. I think in some areas, in some cases, in specific situations, the act has been very successful due to the interaction of the localities. In other areas, probably not so much so.
Thank you, Bill.
Questions?
Questions for Mr. Terry? A lot of you were here through the adoption 1101. I know that in my first General Assembly, and to a lesser extent over time, but anytime something would come up about possibly introducing legislation that would amend 1101, I remember Doug Goddard, for example, and folks from the school board said, "Oh my heavens, don't go there. Don't open up that can of worms." And how many times did we hear that? But you can see from the retrospective that there have actually been quite a few bills. Some of them were short-lived, but there's been a concern, if not a drumbeat, sort of consistently throughout, and that's why this is a great time to review it. My experience was I actually served on the coordinating committee in Shelby County, and it's a process that once people got through it, they just wanted to get away from it, and didn't really want to go back and be on deck if people had concerns to come back to it. So it really hasn't been utilized as a living entity that could address concerns going forward. People just sort of are afraid of opening up that can of worms.
Another observation I might make is that I served on the coordinating committee in Sumner County as a representative of the city that I worked in at the time. And we went through all the processes that you had to go through. We did all the studies. We developed a plan. Prior to that coordinating committee and prior to this law being passed, the cities of Gallatin, Hendersonville, Goodlettsville, and Millersville were all in court, suing each other over annexation. After this act was passed and after the adoption of the local county plan, none of that has occurred. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So in that respect, I think it's very successful.
And somewhat beneficial. I might mention here that with the restructuring of development offices, a lot of the land use plans and the backup documentation for them that had resided in various regions was really all sort of consolidated here in what's Dan's?
Dan Hawk.
Yeah.
Economic and Community Development.
Economic and Community Development. If anybody wonders what happened to the plans, they reside across the street. I've been there, and one of the things that I've asked by way of suggesting that it should be done is that some of those materials be duplicated, some of them be housed at the archives, and otherwise that we consider make recommendations where those documents should otherwise be accessible, either working with ECD and making sure they're out there, but it's the kind of documentation that darn near slipped away, but it didn't. We have it, and we can preserve it. But it's still, those are the working blueprints. Those are the plans that obtain right now, and by which, these counties are still to operate. So they're important. Anything else for the good of the order, Lanice?
I just want to make a general comment and follow up to this particular presentation. Two big sections here, very complex, comprehensive, and very preliminary. Looking at the bills that have come and gone over the years since the early 90s and looking at what other states are doing, we're going to come back to you with more organized information that I think will make it easier for you to follow this. Looking back at the bill, staff right now are compiling a track for each one of these major issues, notice to property owners and so forth, where they're going to show you over time what the law was before PC 1101, what amendments have been proposed, what changes have been adopted, and so forth for each one of these topical areas to make it easy for you to follow the history over the last 20 years of what's been done in those areas, so that you can see issues that have gone back and forth. Maybe there have been multiple changes, and before PC 1101 we did it one way, PC 1101 did it a second way, we've changed it back in the other direction a little bit. There may be other issues where we have kind of marched in a particular direction in making the changes that have been made, but I also want you to be able to see proposals that have come and come and come and come and come every year, proposals that have just never gone anywhere, taken off notice each year or whatever, so that you can get a better feel for the changes in each one of these particular areas and what has succeeded in the past and what hasn't that feeds into this process. This commission has reviewed these issues over and over, as you've seen in the materials that are presented to you, but a lot of people don't really understand what that history has been, which changes were made when. Looking at the other states, I want you to take the information that we have here as being very preliminary, and I want to point out one thing as an example. If you look at the footnotes, you're going to see the same states named in multiple footnotes. For instance, if you look at the second footnote, or the second bullet at the bottom of that page, 13 states allow municipalities to unilaterally annex property in limited situations. They have other provisions that allow them to annex by ordinance, by referendum, and you'll see overlap between the 13 states that are listed in that bullet and the 32 states that are listed in the second bullet. And one of the things we're going to try to do is look at their referendum requirements and their ordinance provisions and see how limited they are in one or the other. It's sort of like there's a continuum where you can be primarily an ordinance state or primarily a referendum state. Some of the limited circumstances are the only time you can annex by ordinance is if the property is already completely surrounded by the municipality. Otherwise, you have to have a referendum. So the third bullet, where it says 32 states require residents or landowners to approve an annexation, should end with "at least in certain circumstances." We're going to continue to look at that, and we'll probably have slightly different numbers for you the next time you see this. We're going to chart it out for you. So the 50 states are down the side. The possible types of provisions are across the top, and you can see for any particular state or any type of provision how widespread the use of that provision is, or what is the broad set of annexation provisions that any particular state has, so that you can more readily see how they compare to each other and see the overlap in the provisions that they have. The look at the history of the bills should come to you at the July meeting. The second, because we want to take the time to make sure we got this as accurate as we possibly can. The matrix of legislation in other states will come to you in the August meeting. And again, I say July and August based on the proposed dates. They may differ based on your decision.
Representative Carter, I know that you did a lot of research and had a lot more done in presenting Public Chapter 441. I'm sure that this will be instructive. You may have different information or better information, or legal services may have additional information about what is happening in other states. But as staff work to refine the accuracy of what they have here, I hope that they will consult with you, and then whichever lawyer worked with you on drafting. And is there anything you'd like to say about this, since most of the day has been spent focused on talking about your legislation? You're recognized.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate that, and I appreciate everyone's attention to this matter, and it is a very serious matter. I think the number of bills that have been brought are a clear indication of that. And it seems to me that that I'm way too new at this to make any comments, but just an off-the-cuff comment, as I'm bad to make. It seems to me that the group that I represent and have spoken for would be pleased just simply to add referendum requirement to 1101 and leave the rest the same. So we're making something incredibly complex that I'm not sure is that complex. And if these 13 states that allow referendum or non-referendum in limited circumstances is something that pleases people, then I think even my group would agree to that. So we've studied those, and those limited circumstances are extremely limited. Let me trust you. Let me assure you that. We do have all 50 states analyzed and offered that information, and I think correctly that the group wanted to do their own research, and that's exactly why I've done my own research. So there's certainly no problem with that, but I'd be happy to distribute that to anyone that has an interest in it. But I don't want to make this more difficult than it is, and it could become extremely complex, it seems to me. So I would just suggest to put in the back of your mind that if you want to resolve this and move on, it seems to me that the type of research that's been talking here today may take 2 years, not 1 year, and certainly it deserves that. I would like to say this. When I first read 1101 in 2009 at the behest of my boss, Claude Ramsey, when I read 1101, I went back to him and I said, this is the best statute I've ever read passed by the Tennessee legislature. So it is an excellent act. It took a lot of thought. It is well constructed, and so I'm reluctant to make many changes to it, to be quite candid. So if we could consider, and I know I'm probably so far out of order that you can't even measure the degree of it, but simply a referendum approval by a simple majority of those being annexed would be all that my group would ask for.
I'm glad you had an opportunity to speak a little bit on that, just to sort of put things in perspective. But bear in mind that we had, even before the 108th General Assembly convened, deemed it appropriate to take a look back and see where we were in this 20-year process. And as a former member once said, at the risk of opening Ponderosa's box, oh gosh, I shouldn't do that. We are being video streamed, but so we've opened that box a little bit, but I appreciate your insight on it. The first time I met Representative Carter, I also shouldn't admit to this, but I wanted to get his attention. I knew he'd been struggling and fighting mightily in the House to advance this bill that became the Public Chapter 441, and I went up to introduce myself, and I said, say, I hear you're really on to something about 1101. Maybe we should just repeal the whole thing. And you should have seen his face. Do you remember that, Mike, by any chance? It was right near the elevator. But I spoke somewhat in jest. We have the intersection of, in many cases, planning with property rights, and that's the tension that's always underlying the debate and the discussion, and I think it'll be healthy, and look forward to it. I'm sorry to put TACIR through its paces in such a rapid fire, but Brother Caldwell, you're recognized.
I never say much at this committee meeting. Representative Carter hit it right on the head. A referendum works. In 1959, I saw a referendum taken for metropolitan government. It didn't work. 1961, we brought back a referendum, and it did work. So you have to sit down with the people that are involved, and you have to make it work for everyone.
Well said. Appreciate that. Any other words of wisdom for the good of the order? We will reconvene here tomorrow morning at 8:30. And if there's nothing further this afternoon, we'll recess until tomorrow morning at 8:30 a.m. Thank you very much. Today.